I never thought my own daughter would ambush me like this. There I was, thinking I was coming over for our usual Sunday dinner, when I walked into what felt like a courtroom with me as the defendant. The living room had been rearranged, chairs in a circle, tissues strategically placed on the coffee table, and 3 pairs of eyes staring at me with that practiced look of concern that somehow felt more cold than caring. This story changed my life forever. If you want more stories like this, please subscribe and hit that like button. Where are you watching from? My name is Catherine Hayes. I'm 49 years old, and until that Sunday afternoon, I thought I had a pretty good handle on my life. Sure, I'd been going through some changes lately. My divorce was finalized 6 months ago. I'd been dealing with some minor health issues and adjusting to living alone for the first time in 25 years. But I was managing just fine, or so I thought. My daughter, Jessica Hayes, 26 and always the organizer of the family, had called me that morning with her usual cheerful voice. "Mom, why don't you come over for dinner tonight? Nothing fancy, just family time." I should have known something was up when she emphasized family time in that particular way she does when she's planning something. When I arrived at Jessica's suburban home, I immediately noticed my son, Michael Hayes, sitting stiffly on the couch. At 24, Michael usually greeted me with a bear hug and some joke about whatever game he'd been watching. Instead, he gave me a tight smile and gestured toward an empty chair like I was a guest rather than his mother. The whole scene felt orchestrated, rehearsed. But the real surprise was seeing my neighbor and closest friend, Patricia Williams, sitting there with a folder in her lap. Patricia and I had been friends for 8 years, ever since she moved in next door. We shared morning coffee, evening walks, and countless conversations about everything from our kids to our dreams for retirement. She knew about my struggles with the divorce, my occasional dizzy spells that I'd mentioned to my doctor, and my adjustment to living alone. What was she doing at what I now realized was some kind of family meeting? Jessica took charge immediately, which wasn't unusual. She'd been the responsible one since she was 15, always organizing family gatherings and keeping everyone connected. But this felt different. Her voice had that professional tone she used at her job as a hospital administrator, measured and careful. "Mom, we asked you here because we love you and we're worried," Jessica began, glancing at Patricia, who nodded encouragingly. "We've all noticed some changes lately, and we think it's time to talk about your living situation." The word intervention hadn't been spoken yet, but I could feel it hanging in the air like smoke. Michael shifted uncomfortably, running his hands through his dark hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. He worked as a carpenter and had always been more of a doer than a talker, so seeing him part of this verbal ambush felt particularly jarring. "What kind of changes?" I asked, genuinely confused. I looked from face to face, searching for clues about what had brought this on. I'd been managing my household, keeping up with my part-time job at the library, maintaining my friendships. Yes, I'd had a few minor incidents, forgetting my keys a couple of times, feeling a bit unsteady when I got up too quickly, but nothing that seemed significant enough for this level of concern. Patricia leaned forward, her expression gentle but serious. At 62, she'd become like an older sister to me, someone I trusted completely. "Catherine, remember last week when you called me at 2 in the morning asking if I'd seen your car? You'd forgotten you'd parked it on the street instead of in your driveway." The memory came back in a rush, and I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. I'd been half asleep and disoriented, and yes, I'd panicked when I couldn't see my car from my bedroom window. But that was hardly evidence of incompetence. "And there was the incident with leaving the stove on," Jessica added, consulting what appeared to be a list. "Mrs. Patterson from across the street called me because she could smell gas. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that these were isolated incidents, the kind of things that happen to anyone dealing with stress and major life changes. But looking at their faces, Jessica's determined concern, Michael's reluctant agreement, and Patricia's supportive but worried expression, I realized they'd been discussing me behind my back for who knows how long. The conversation continued for what felt like hours. They brought up my recent fall in the garden, which had resulted in nothing more than a scraped knee and bruised pride. They mentioned my occasional forgetfulness, my reluctance to drive at night anymore, and my admission that I sometimes felt lonely in the house I'd shared with their father for so many years. Each incident, viewed separately, seemed minor, but presented together in their carefully prepared presentation, they painted a picture of someone who was declining, struggling, perhaps even unsafe living alone. The word burden came up when Jessica started talking about how much time they spent worrying about me, checking in, making sure I was okay. "We've been researching some really nice assisted living communities," Patricia said, opening her folder to reveal glossy brochures filled with images of smiling seniors participating in activities, eating meals in bright dining rooms, and sitting in comfortable common areas. "These places aren't like the old nursing homes, Catherine. They're communities where you'd have independence, but also support when you need it." Michael finally spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. "Mom, we just want to know you're safe and happy. Maybe being around people your own age, having activities planned, not worrying about maintaining the house. Maybe it would be good for you." I sat there, feeling like I was watching my life being reorganized without my permission. These three people, the ones closest to me in the world, had apparently decided that I was no longer capable of making my own decisions about where and how to live. The betrayal stung more than their actual concerns about my well-being. The trap I'd missed finally sprang shut. 2 weeks later, I was rifling through Jessica's old bedroom closet, looking for the Christmas decorations she'd insisted I no longer needed to worry about putting up myself, when I found the folder. It had fallen behind a box of her college textbooks, and at first I thought it was just more of those assisted living brochures. But when I opened it, my hands started shaking. Sunny Meadows Assisted Living Financial Planning Worksheet was printed across the top. Below it, in Jessica's neat handwriting, were calculations. My Social Security income, the estimated value of my house, my savings account balance, and something that made my blood run cold, a breakdown of what they called available assets after property sale. There were phone numbers written in the margins, notes about intake processes, and Medicare coverage limitations. But what really caught my attention was a yellow sticky note attached to one of the pages. "M says we can list the house as soon as she's moved. Patricia thinks we should wait until after holidays, but I disagree. Market is hot right now." I sank onto Jessica's old bed, the folder trembling in my hands. They weren't just worried about my safety. They were planning to sell my home. When I heard the front door open, I quickly shoved the folder back where I'd found it and made my way downstairs, my heart pounding. "Mom?" Jessica called out. "I brought some groceries, and I wanted to talk about scheduling a tour of Sunny Meadows." I found her in the kitchen, unpacking bags with the efficiency of someone who'd already made all the important decisions. She looked up at me with that same concerned smile that had become so familiar over the past few weeks. "How are you feeling about visiting the facility?" she asked, pulling out items I hadn't asked for. The soft foods, the easy-to-open containers, the things you buy for someone you think can't take care of themselves anymore. I watched her arrange everything in my cabinets, reorganizing my space without asking. "Jessica, I need to ask you something directly." She paused, a can of soup in her hand. "Of course, Mom. What is it?" Are you planning to sell my house? The color drained from her face so quickly that I knew I had my answer before she even spoke. The can slipped from her fingers and rolled across the counter. Mom, how did you? She stopped herself, straightening her shoulders in that way she'd done since childhood, when caught in something she couldn't explain away. We were going to discuss that with you, after you'd had time to settle into your new living situation. My new living situation? I kept my voice steady, though inside I was screaming. You mean after you'd moved me somewhere against my will, and I no longer had a choice in the matter? It's not against your will, Mom. We talked about this. You agreed to look at the facilities. I agreed to look, Jessica. I never agreed to move, and I certainly never agreed to let you sell the house your father and I built together. Jessica's face flushed red. Mom, you can't maintain this place anymore. The yard work, the repairs, the upkeep, it's too much for you. And frankly, it's too much for us to constantly worry about. So this is about making your life easier. That's not fair. Her voice rose, and I could hear the frustration she'd been holding back during all those careful, concerned conversations. Do you have any idea how many nights I lie awake wondering if you're okay? How many times Michael and I text each other because we haven't heard from you in a day? Patricia keeps telling us we're overreacting, but she doesn't live here. She doesn't see what we see. And what exactly do you see, Jessica? She slammed the cabinet door shut with more force than necessary. I see my mother getting confused about whether she turned off the stove. I see her falling in the garden and not telling anyone for 2 days. I see her calling the police because she forgot where she parked her car. I see her rattling around in this big house, talking to pictures of Dad like he's still here. The last comment hit me like a physical blow. I did talk to Robert's pictures. It helped with the loneliness, made the house feel less empty. I hadn't realized Jessica had noticed, or that she saw it as evidence of my deteriorating mental state. Your father was my partner for 38 years, I said quietly. Forgive me if I'm not ready to erase every trace of that life just because it makes you uncomfortable. Jessica's expression softened, and for a moment, I saw my daughter instead of my self-appointed guardian. Mom, I don't want you to erase anything. I just want you to be safe and happy. And I want to sleep at night without wondering if I'm going to get a call from the hospital or the police or... She trailed off, but I could see the genuine fear in her eyes. This wasn't just about convenience or inheritance planning. She was truly terrified that something would happen to me. But that didn't excuse the deception. When exactly were you planning to tell me about your decision to sell the house? I asked. After you'd had time to adjust. After you realized how much better life could be in a community setting. So never then. You were planning to present it as a fait accompli? Jessica opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. We both knew I was right. The kitchen fell silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock Robert had hung there 20 years ago. I watched Jessica fidget with the grocery receipt, folding and unfolding it as she searched for the right words. Finally, she looked up at me. What would you have us do, Mom? Just pretend everything is fine and wait for something terrible to happen? Before I could answer, I heard Michael's voice from the front door. Mom, Jess, I saw your car out front. Jessica and I looked at each other, both realizing that this conversation was about to get much more complicated. But what Michael told us when he walked into that kitchen changed everything I thought I knew about my children's motivations. Michael walked into the kitchen carrying his usual exhaustion like a heavy coat. His hair was disheveled, his work shirt wrinkled, and he had that slightly frantic look he got when he'd been running late all day. But when he saw Jessica and me standing there in obvious tension, He stopped short. "Everything okay?" he asked, though clearly nothing was. Jessica shot me a warning look, but I was done with secrets and careful maneuvering around the truth. "Your sister was just explaining why she's been grocery shopping for me without asking," I said. "Apparently, it's part of keeping me safe." Michael set his keys on the counter with deliberate care. "Ah, so we're having that conversation." "We're having all the conversations," I said. "Starting with why you think I need supervision to buy milk." He pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair. For a long moment, he just stared at the table. When he finally looked up, his expression was different from Jessica's determined concern. He looked guilty. "Mom, there's something we haven't told you," he said. Jessica went very still. "Michael, don't." "She deserves to know," he said firmly. "She's not some confused old lady we need to manage. She's our mother, and she's standing right here asking direct questions." I felt a chill run through me. "Know what?" Michael looked at Jessica, who shook her head sharply. He ignored her. "6 weeks ago, Mrs. Henderson called Jessica," he said. "She was worried about you." I frowned. Eleanor Henderson had been my neighbor for 15 years, ever since she and her husband moved into the blue house across the street. We weren't particularly close, but we were friendly enough. "Worried about what?" "She said she'd seen you in your garden at 3 a.m, in your nightgown, digging around the rose bushes with a flashlight." The memory came back in a rush, and with it, a flush of embarrassment. I couldn't sleep, and I remembered I'd dropped my wedding ring somewhere near the roses that afternoon. I was trying to find it before the sprinklers came on. "Did you find it?" Michael asked gently. "Yes, I did. It had fallen into the mulch." "Okay, that's actually perfectly reasonable." He looked relieved. "But Mrs. Henderson didn't know that. She just saw her elderly neighbor wandering around outside in the middle of the night and got concerned." Jessica jumped in. "And then, 2 weeks later, she called again because she'd seen you bring in your mail at 11 p.m. I stared at her. "I was coming home from Margaret's book club. We'd gone late because we were discussing a particularly long novel." "Margaret?" Michael asked. "Margaret Peterson, from church. We've had the same book club for 3 years." Jessica and Michael exchanged glances. I could practically see the carefully constructed narrative of my decline crumbling between them. "Mom," Jessica said slowly, "why didn't you tell us about the book club?" "Why would I need to tell you about every social engagement I have? You're both busy with your own lives." Michael leaned forward. "Because we've been worried that you're isolated." "That you're not getting out of the house enough." The irony was almost laughable. "So you decided the solution was to move me somewhere with even less freedom?" "We thought—" Jessica started, then stopped. "We thought you were lonely, and maybe getting a little confused." "I am lonely," I admitted. "This house feels enormous without your father. But I'm not confused. I'm grieving. There's a difference." Michael looked stricken. "Mom, I'm so sorry. We should have just talked to you." "Yes, you should have. Instead of taking reports from the neighbors like I'm some kind of community watch problem." Jessica sat down across from Michael, looking deflated. "Mrs. Henderson meant well. And when she called the second time, and then you had that fall in the garden, which I told you about, 2 days later," she said. 2 days, Mom. You could have been seriously hurt." "But I wasn't. I bruised my hip and scraped my hands. I'm 74 years old, not made of glass." Michael reached across the table and took my hand. "We know that. We do. but when you're dealing with the possibility of losing the only parent you have left. His voice caught, and I felt my anger begin to soften despite myself. I'm scared, he continued. Every day, I'm scared of getting that call. The one that says something happened, and we weren't there, and you were alone, and... He took a shaky breath. Maybe we're handling it all wrong, but we're scared. I squeezed his hand. Being scared doesn't give you the right to make decisions about my life without consulting me. You're absolutely right, he said. But Mom, we need to figure out some middle ground here, because doing nothing isn't working for any of us. Jessica nodded reluctantly. I can't keep lying awake wondering if you're okay, and apparently I can't keep relying on neighborhood surveillance either. Despite everything, I almost smiled at that. Eleanor Henderson is hardly running a surveillance operation. She might as well be, Michael said. Do you know she has your phone number programmed into her cell phone as emergency Margaret next door? Now I did laugh, though it was edged with exasperation. That woman has always been overly dramatic. Maybe, Jessica said. But she cares about you, and so do we. We just need to find a way to show that caring without steamrolling over your independence. I looked at my two children, really looked at them. Jessica, with her careful planning and need to control outcomes, so much like her father. Michael, with his gentle worry and tendency to catastrophize, so much like me. Both of them exhausted from carrying fears they'd never fully articulated. What if, I said carefully, we started with honesty, all of us? What do you mean? Jessica asked. I mean, I'll be more forthcoming about my activities and any concerns I have about my health or safety. And you two will be honest about your worries instead of going behind my back to address them. Michael nodded slowly. That sounds reasonable. And, I continued, we'll agree that any major decisions about my living situation get discussed openly, with all cards on the table. No interventions, no fait accompli presentations. Jessica had the grace to look ashamed. Agreed. There's one more thing, I said, and they both tensed slightly. I want to meet with Mrs. Patterson. Their faces went blank. Who's Mrs. Patterson? Michael asked. I felt my stomach drop. The woman from Sunset Manor. The one you've been talking to about moving me there. Jessica and Michael looked at each other with genuine confusion. Mom, Jessica said slowly, we've never talked to anyone at Sunset Manor. We looked at their website, but we haven't contacted them. The kitchen seemed to tilt slightly around me. But you said, in the living room yesterday, you mentioned specific details about their programs. From their website, Michael said, and from driving past the place, but we never spoke to any Mrs. Patterson. I gripped the back of my chair as a cold realization washed over me. If my children hadn't been in contact with Sunset Manor, then who had called me that morning asking about scheduling a tour? And how did they know I was considering a move? I felt the blood drain from my face as the implications hit me. Someone had called me this morning, claiming to be from Sunset Manor, asking about scheduling a tour. Someone who knew I was considering assisted living. Someone who wasn't my children. Mom. Jessica's voice seemed to come from far away. You look pale. What's wrong? I sank into the kitchen chair, my mind racing. Someone called me this morning. A woman who said she was Mrs. Patterson from Sunset Manor. She wanted to schedule a tour for me. Michael leaned forward, concern creasing his features. But if we never contacted them, then how did they know? I finished for him. The kitchen felt suddenly cold despite the morning sun streaming through the windows. Jessica's expression shifted from confusion to something harder. What exactly did this woman say? I tried to recall the conversation, but the details felt fuzzy now, tainted by this new information. She said she understood I was interested in their community, that someone had inquired about their memory care options specifically. Memory care? Michael's voice pitched higher. Mom, we never mentioned memory care. We were looking at independent living. The distinction hit me like a physical blow. Independent living suggested choice, autonomy, a next step in life. Memory care suggested something else entirely, something that implied I was losing pieces of myself. I need to think about this, I said, standing abruptly. The movement made me dizzy, and I gripped the counter. No, Jessica said firmly. We just agreed on honesty, remember? No more handling things alone. I looked at my daughter, seeing her father's stubborn determination in the set of her jaw. Fine, but I need Eleanor here for this conversation. Mrs. Henderson? Michael asked. Why? Because Eleanor sees everything, I thought. Because she's been my anchor in this neighborhood longer than anyone. Because sometimes you need someone who knows you but isn't related to you to help you think clearly. Because she's been watching out for me, apparently. And if someone is calling me claiming to know about my living situation, she might have noticed something I missed. Jessica looked skeptical. Like what? I don't know yet. That's why I want to talk to her. 20 minutes later, Eleanor sat at my kitchen table, still wearing her gardening gloves and looking slightly bewildered by the urgency of the summons. I'd given her a brief overview, but now, facing all three of them, I felt the weight of how strange this all sounded. Let me make sure I understand, Eleanor said, pulling off her gloves with deliberate care. You received a call from someone claiming to be from Sunset Manor, asking about a tour, but Jessica and Michael never contacted them. That's right, I said. Eleanor turned to my children. And you two were planning to present your mother with assisted living options yesterday without discussing it with her first. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. We were concerned about her safety. I see. Eleanor's tone was carefully neutral. And Margaret, you've been having some concerns about your memory? The question hung in the air like smoke. I felt my children's attention sharpen, waiting for my answer. Some, I admitted. Nothing dramatic, but enough to make me wonder sometimes. Michael reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Why didn't you tell us? Because I was afraid you'd react exactly the way you did react, I said. By trying to take control of the situation. Eleanor nodded slowly. So we have someone unknown calling about memory care specifically, when the children were only researching independent living. That suggests either a remarkable coincidence or someone else is involved in this situation. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a lawnmower. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if all my careful privacy had been stripped away layer by layer. There's something else, I said quietly. The woman on the phone knew things. She mentioned that I lived alone, that I had adult children who were concerned about me. Details that weren't in any inquiry you two might have made. Jessica's expression had gone cold and sharp. Someone's been watching you. Or listening, Eleanor added thoughtfully. Margaret, have you discussed your concerns about memory or living situations with anyone else? Your doctor? Friends? I thought back over the past few months, trying to remember conversations. Dr. Williams, during my last appointment. But that was months ago, and it was just a casual mention. Anyone else? Eleanor pressed. I don't think so. I'm not exactly social lately. The admission stung, but it was true. Beyond Eleanor and my children, My daily interactions were limited to brief exchanges with cashiers and delivery drivers. Michael was shaking his head. This doesn't make sense. Why would Sunset Manor cold call you? How would they even know you exist? Unless, Jessica said slowly, someone contacted them on your behalf. Someone who isn't us. The possibility settled over the kitchen like a shadow. I tried to think of who else might have that kind of information about my life, who might feel entitled to make inquiries about my care. The list was disturbingly short. There's only one way to find out, I said, reaching for my phone. I'm calling Sunset Manor back. Eleanor placed her hand gently over mine, stopping me. Wait, before you do that, let's think about what you want to achieve with this call. I looked at her, grateful for her steady presence. I want to know who contacted them about me. And if they won't tell you, then I want to know if this Mrs. Patterson actually exists. Jessica leaned forward. And if she doesn't? The question hung between us, unanswered and heavy with implications I wasn't ready to face. Because if Mrs. Patterson didn't exist, if no one from Sunset Manor had actually called me, then I was dealing with something far more troubling than my children's well-meaning interference. I was dealing with the possibility that my mind was creating conversations that had never happened. The weight of that possibility pressed down on me like a physical force. I stared at my phone, suddenly afraid of what I might discover. What if I called, and they had no record of contacting me? What if Mrs. Patterson was a figment of my imagination? Mom, Michael said gently, and I realized I'd been silent for a long moment. Whatever we find out, we'll figure it out together. His words were meant to comfort, but they only highlighted how much had changed. A week ago, my children thought I was losing my grip on reality. Now, here was Michael, offering support in the face of something that might prove them right. Jessica was studying my face with the intensity she'd inherited from her father. Tell us exactly what this Mrs. Patterson said to you. Every detail you can remember. I closed my eyes, trying to reconstruct the conversation. She said she was calling from Sunset Manor, that they had received an inquiry about their services for me. She knew I lived alone, knew I had adult children who were concerned about my independence. What did her voice sound like? Eleanor asked. Professional, friendly but not overly warm. She had a slight accent, maybe Southern. I paused, realizing something. She mentioned their memory care unit specifically, said they had an opening that might be perfect for someone in my situation. Michael's jaw tightened. Memory care, that's pretty specific. Too specific for a cold call, Jessica added. Mom, when exactly did this conversation happen? What day? What time? I thought back, trying to anchor the memory in concrete details. Tuesday morning. I remember because I was having my second cup of coffee, and I only do that on weekdays when I don't have anywhere to be. Last Tuesday? Eleanor asked. That would be the 15th. Yes, around 10:30, I think. Jessica pulled out her phone and started typing. I'm making notes. We need to document everything before you make this call. The systematic approach was so typically Jessica that it almost made me smile. Even in the midst of uncertainty, she was creating order, building a case. It occurred to me that this methodical nature might be exactly what we needed. There's something else, I said slowly. Mrs. Patterson asked if I'd like to schedule a tour. When I hesitated, she said something like, I understand this is a big decision, but don't wait too long. Our memory care beds fill up quickly, and given your family's concerns, sooner might be better than later. The kitchen went quiet again. Even the lawnmower had stopped. That sounds like pressure, Michael said finally. Legitimate facilities don't usually push people into quick decisions. Eleanor nodded. In my experience with real estate, high-pressure tactics are often a red flag. Reputable businesses give people time to think. Jessica looked up from her phone. Okay, here's what I think we should do. Mom, you call them back, but put it on speaker so we can all hear. Ask to speak to Mrs. Patterson specifically. If she exists and this is legitimate, she'll remember you and be able to reference your previous conversation. And if she doesn't exist? I asked. Then we know something else is going on, Michael said. Either someone is running some kind of scam or... He didn't finish the sentence, but we all knew what he meant, or I was having conversations that weren't real. I picked up my phone, then set it down again. I need to ask you something first, both of you. I looked at my children. If it turns out that I did imagine this call, if Mrs. Patterson doesn't exist, what happens then? The question hung between us, heavy with implications none of us wanted to face. Michael reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Then we figure out what's really going on, together. But you'll think I'm losing my mind. Mom, Jessica said quietly, even if something is happening with your memory, you're still our mother. You're still the woman who raised us, who taught us how to think critically and face problems head on. One phone call, real or imagined, doesn't change that. Eleanor cleared her throat softly. Margaret, there are many reasons why someone might experience something like this. Stress, medication interactions, sleep deprivation, even vitamin deficiencies. If this conversation didn't happen the way you remember it, that doesn't mean you're losing your mind. Her practical tone was reassuring, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She was worried about me, just like my children were. The difference was that Eleanor's worry felt protective rather than controlling. I picked up the phone again, my finger hovering over the screen. What if they ask me questions I can't answer? What if I can't remember details that I should remember? Then we'll handle that too, Jessica said. Mom, you've been handling difficult situations your whole life. You raised 2 kids mostly on your own after Dad died. You built a career, managed a household, made countless decisions both big and small. Don't let fear of one uncertain phone call make you forget how capable you are. The words hit me unexpectedly hard. When had I started doubting myself so thoroughly? When had my children's concern begun to feel like evidence of my incompetence rather than their love? You're right, I said, and meant it. Whatever this is, I can handle it. I dialed the number for Sunset Manor, putting the phone on speaker as Jessica had suggested. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Sunset Manor, this is Rebecca. How can I help you? The voice was young, cheerful, definitely not Mrs. Patterson. I glanced at my children and Eleanor, drawing strength from their presence. Hello, I'd like to speak with Mrs. Patterson, please. She called me earlier this week about your services. There was a pause. I'm sorry. Could you spell that last name for me? My heart began to pound, but I kept my voice steady. Patterson. She said she was calling about memory care services. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear typing in the background. Ma'am, I don't show anyone by that name on our staff. Could you possibly be thinking of someone else? The silence in the room felt thick as molasses. I stared at the phone, my mouth suddenly dry. I'm sorry, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Could you check again? She specifically mentioned your memory care program and said she'd gotten my information from my son, David. More typing sounds came through the speaker. Ma'am, I've checked our entire directory, including former employees. We don't have any record of a Mrs. Patterson. And actually, our memory care unit has a waiting list that's been closed for 6 months. We haven't been making any outreach calls. I looked up to find 3 pairs of eyes watching me with varying degrees of concern. David's expression was unreadable, but I could see him mentally cataloging this information. Jessica reached across and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," I managed to say into the phone. I must have been mistaken about the name. After I hung up, the silence stretched uncomfortably. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into something I didn't understand. "Mom," David said carefully, "are you sure someone called you? Because if no one by that name works there—" "I know what I heard," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I felt less certain. The conversation that had seemed so real, so threatening just an hour ago, now felt like trying to hold on to water. Eleanor leaned forward in her chair. "Margaret, when exactly did this call happen? What were you doing right before it?" I closed my eyes, trying to reconstruct the moment. It was Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I'd just finished watching my cooking show. I was feeling a bit drowsy, actually. I'd taken that new medication for my arthritis, and sometimes it makes me sleepy. Jessica and David exchanged a glance that didn't escape my notice. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked, feeling a familiar spike of defensiveness. David shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, there's something we need to discuss. Jessica and I have been talking, and we're worried about you for reasons that have nothing to do with any phone call." My stomach dropped. "What kind of reasons?" Jessica pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. It was my kitchen counter, covered with at least a dozen pill bottles. "Mom, I took this last week when I came by to help you with your grocery shopping. You had multiple bottles of the same medication, some of them expired, and you couldn't remember which ones your doctor had told you to take." I stared at the photo, a cold realization creeping over me. I did remember being confused about my medications lately. The pharmacy seemed to be giving me different bottles every time, and keeping track of what to take when had become increasingly frustrating. And there was the incident with Mrs. Chen next door. David added gently. "What incident?" But even as I asked, a fuzzy memory surfaced. Something about her cat, and me being upset about something I couldn't quite remember. Eleanor spoke up. "Margaret, what's the last thing you clearly remember about your neighbor?" I tried to focus, but it was like looking through fog. "She has that orange cat that sometimes gets into my garden. I talked to her about it, I think. But she seemed upset with me for some reason." David's voice was very gentle now. "Mom, Mrs. Chen's cat died 3 years ago. Last week, you went over to her house at 10 at night, very agitated, demanding that she keep her cat out of your yard. She was frightened and didn't know how to respond." The words hit me like physical blows. I remembered being angry about something, remembered feeling justified in my frustration, but the details were sliding away from me like sand through my fingers. "I don't understand," I whispered. "I remember these things differently." Jessica moved her chair closer to mine. "Mom, that's why we wanted to talk to you. Not because we think you're a burden, not because we want to ship you off somewhere, but because we're scared. We've been watching you struggle with things that used to be second nature to you, and we didn't know how to bring it up." I felt tears starting to form. "So there never was an intervention? You never said those horrible things about me being too much trouble?" "Never," David said firmly. "Mom, you're not a burden. You're our mother, and we love you. But love means not ignoring when someone we care about might need help." Eleanor reached over and took my other hand. "Margaret, I've known you for 15 years. I've watched you handle every crisis with grace and intelligence. This doesn't change who you are, but it might change what kind of support you need." I sat there, holding hands with my friend, while my children watched me with expressions full of love and worry. The phone call that had felt so real, so threatening, was dissolving like a dream in daylight. But the reality it was being replaced with was almost harder to accept. What if it gets worse? I asked, voicing the fear that was clawing at my chest. Then we'll figure it out together, Jessica said. But Mom, we can't help you if we don't know what's really happening. David nodded. We want to start by having you talk to Dr. Morrison. Get a proper evaluation, maybe adjust your medications, see if some of this is being caused by things that can be fixed. And if it can't be fixed? The question hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor squeezed my hand tighter. Then we make a plan, she said simply. But Margaret, jumping to worst-case scenarios won't help anyone. Let's find out what we're actually dealing with first. I nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside me. The terror I'd been carrying since that phantom phone call was transforming into something else. Still scary, but different. More like the fear you feel before making a necessary but difficult decision. Okay, I said. I'll call Dr. Morrison tomorrow. We'll call, Jessica corrected gently. I'm coming with you to that appointment. You don't need to. Mom, David interrupted. This is what family does. We show up for each other. I was about to respond when the front door opened and closed with a bang that made us all jump. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, and I felt my heart rate spike with a fear I couldn't explain. Mom? A voice called out. Mom, we need to talk. Now! I froze in my chair, staring at Eleanor and my children with wide eyes. The voice from the hallway sounded exactly like David, but David was sitting right here in front of me, his face pale with confusion. Did you hear that? I whispered. Eleanor's grip on my hand tightened. Margaret, that sounded just like David, but I'm right here, Mom, David said quietly, his voice shaking slightly. I'm sitting right here. Jessica stood up slowly, looking toward the hallway. Mom, did you lock the front door when Eleanor arrived? I tried to think back, but my mind felt foggy again. I thought I did. I always lock it after someone comes in. Mom? The voice called again from somewhere near the kitchen. Where are you? We really need to have that talk about the assisted living place. The blood drained from my face. It was exactly like the phone call that never happened, but now there was someone in my house saying these things. Someone who sounded exactly like my son. David stood up, his jaw set with determination. Stay here with Mom and Eleanor, he told Jessica. I'm going to check the house. David, no. I grabbed his arm. What if someone broke in? What if they're dangerous? Mom, the doors were locked. No one broke in. His voice was gentle but firm. But we need to figure out what's happening. Jessica moved closer to my chair. David's right. This has to be connected to everything else we've been talking about. Eleanor was studying my face carefully. Margaret, when you heard that voice just now, did it feel real to you? Like when you got that phone call earlier? I closed my eyes, trying to focus on the sensations in my body, the way the room felt, the sounds around me. I don't know anymore. Everything feels real when it's happening. But then... Mom? The voice called again, closer now. I know you can hear me. Eleanor and Jessica are filling your head with nonsense. You know what we decided at the family meeting? Eleanor's face went white. Margaret, I never told you I was coming over today. How would someone else know I'm here? The realization hit me like a physical blow. Whatever was happening in my mind was getting more complex, more detailed. It wasn't just phantom phone calls anymore. It was creating entire scenarios, complete with people who couldn't possibly be there. David had reached the hallway, and I could hear his footsteps as he checked the kitchen, the living room, even upstairs. After a few minutes, he returned to the dining room. "There's no one here, Mom. All the doors are still locked from the inside. All the windows are secure." I buried my face in my hands. This is worse than I thought, isn't it? I'm not just forgetting things or getting confused. I'm hearing things that aren't there, seeing people who don't exist. "We don't know what it is yet," Jessica said, but I could hear the worry in her voice. "That's why we need to get you to Dr. Morrison as soon as possible." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "Margaret, I want you to know that even if this is something serious, even if it's something that can't be completely fixed, you're not alone in this. We're all going to figure it out together." "But what if I can't trust my own mind anymore? What if I can't tell what's real and what isn't?" The questions tumbled out of me, each one carrying the weight of my deepest fears. David sat back down and took both my hands in his. "Then we'll be your anchors to reality. When you're not sure about something, you ask us. When something doesn't feel right, you call us immediately." "That's not fair to you," I protested. "You have your own lives, your own problems." "Mom!" Jessica's voice was fierce. "Stop trying to protect us from loving you. This is what love looks like sometimes. It's messy and scary and inconvenient, but we're family." I felt tears rolling down my cheeks, but for the first time since this whole nightmare began, they weren't tears of pure terror. There was relief mixed in, and gratitude, and something that might have been hope. "What do I do right now?" I asked. "How do I get through tonight knowing that my brain might create entire conversations that feel completely real?" Eleanor stood up and walked to my kitchen, returning with a notepad and pen. "We're going to write down what actually happened today. All of us will sign it. If you have doubts later about what was real, you can read this." She began writing in her careful handwriting. "November 15th, 7:30 p.m. Eleanor came to check on Margaret after she called sounding distressed. David and Jessica came over to talk with Margaret about getting medical help. Margaret heard a voice that sounded like David calling from another room, but David was present in the dining room the entire time. The house was empty except for the four of us. As she wrote, I felt something settling in my chest, a sense of being grounded, anchored to something solid. But then the phone rang. We all froze as the phone's shrill ring cut through the evening air. The sound seemed impossibly loud after our intense conversation, and I felt my heart start racing again. "I'll get it," David said, starting to rise from his chair. "No." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "I need to answer it myself. If I'm going to learn to navigate this, I have to start somewhere." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "That's good thinking, Margaret. But maybe put it on speaker so we can all hear?" I walked to the kitchen phone, my legs feeling unsteady. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. I picked up the receiver and pressed the speaker button. "Hello? Is this Margaret Henderson?" The voice was crisp, professional. "Yes, this is Margaret. This is Nancy from Premier Care Assisted Living. I understand your family has been exploring care options for you, and I wanted to follow up on your application." The silence in the room was deafening. I felt the blood drain from my face as I turned to look at my children. David had gone pale, and Jessica was staring at him with an expression I'd never seen before. "I'm sorry," I said slowly, "but I haven't submitted any application to your facility." "Oh, I see. Well, according to our records, Your son, David Henderson, submitted an application on your behalf last week. He listed himself as your power of attorney and requested our earliest available placement. The phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hand. Could you hold on just one moment, please? I pressed the mute button and turned to face David. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. David. My voice was barely a whisper. What did you do? Mom, I can explain. You told me we were going to figure this out together. You sat right there and held my hands and promised we'd be a team, and you already had me signed up for a nursing home? Jessica stood up abruptly. David, please tell me she's wrong. Please tell me you didn't do this behind her back. David ran his hands through his hair, looking miserable. I filled out some preliminary paperwork, yes. But it wasn't what you think. I wasn't trying to trick anyone. Then what were you trying to do? Eleanor's voice was dangerously quiet. I was scared, okay? After Mom called me about the man in her house, after she couldn't remember our conversation from 2 days ago, I panicked. I thought if something happened to her, if she had a medical emergency or got confused and wandered off, I needed to have options ready. I unmuted the phone. Ma'am, I'm going to need to call you back. There seems to be some confusion. Of course, Mrs. Henderson. We'll hold the file until we hear from you. I hung up and turned back to David. Options ready? Or did you just decide that tonight's conversation was for show? Were you planning to let me think I had a choice while you'd already made the decision? No, Mom. That's not... David stopped, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. Okay, maybe it was a little bit that, but only because I was terrified of losing you. So you decided to lose me first? The words came out more bitter than I'd intended, but I couldn't take them back. Jessica sat back down heavily. David, how could you do this without talking to any of us? How could you do this without talking to her? Because look how hard tonight was. David's composure finally cracked. Look how scared she is. Look how scared we all are. I thought if I had a backup plan, if I had somewhere safe for her to go, maybe I could sleep at night knowing she wouldn't hurt herself or disappear or maybe you could sleep at night knowing the problem was someone else's responsibility, Eleanor said quietly. David flinched as if she'd slapped him. That's not fair. Isn't it? Eleanor stood up and walked over to where I was still standing by the phone. Margaret just had the courage to answer that phone even though she wasn't sure if the voice she'd heard earlier was real or not. She just told us she wanted to fight this thing, whatever it is, and instead of supporting that courage, you've been planning to warehouse her? It's not a warehouse, David said defensively. Premier Care is a really nice place. They have activities and... I don't care if they have a spa and a 5-star restaurant, I interrupted. The point is that you made this decision without me. After everything we just talked about, after all your promises about being my anchor to reality, you were planning to ship me off. David slumped forward, his head in his hands. I don't know how to do this, Mom. I don't know how to watch you disappear piece by piece. I don't know how to be strong enough for both of us. Some of the anger drained out of me, replaced by a familiar ache. David, honey, look at me. He raised his head, and I could see tears in his eyes. I'm not asking you to be strong enough for both of us. I'm asking you to let me be strong enough for myself as long as I can. And when I can't anymore, I'm asking you to help me be strong, not to take over being strong for me. Jessica reached over and put her hand on David's shoulder. She's right, David, and you should have talked to me before doing something like this. We're supposed to be in this together, too. I know I screwed up. I was just... God, I was so scared after that phone call. She sounded so confused, so frightened. And I thought about Dad, about how fast he went downhill at the end, and I couldn't bear the thought of going through that again. The mention of my late husband hung in the air between us. Robert had died 3 years ago after a brief but brutal battle with cancer. David had taken it particularly hard. "This isn't the same thing as your father, David," I said gently. "And even if it were, running away from it wouldn't make it hurt less." Eleanor sat back down at the table. "David, I think you need to call that place back tomorrow and withdraw the application. And then, I think you need to figure out how to be part of the solution instead of jumping to what feels like the easy answer." "You're right." David wiped his eyes. "I'll call them first thing in the morning. Mom, I'm sorry, I really am. I was acting out of fear, and I ended up doing exactly what we accused you of doing, trying to handle everything alone instead of trusting the people who love me." I walked back to the table and sat down. "We're all scared, David. The difference is that this is my life we're talking about. My mind, my home, my future. I need to be part of making decisions about it, even if those decisions turn out to be wrong." "What if you get to a point where you can't make good decisions anymore?" David asked. "What if this thing, whatever it is, gets worse?" "Then we'll deal with that when it happens." "But we'll deal with it together, and we'll deal with it honestly. No more secret phone calls to nursing homes. No more making plans behind each other's backs." Jessica nodded. "We need some ground rules, some agreements about how we're going to handle this." "Like what?" I asked. "Like David calls before making any decisions about your care. Like you promise to tell us when things feel wrong or scary instead of trying to handle it alone. Like we all commit to being honest with each other, even when the truth is hard to hear." Eleanor picked up the pen again. "Should we write this down too? Add it to our reality anchor list?" "Yes," I said. "I think we should." But as Eleanor started writing, I found myself wondering, what if the next time something like this happened, I couldn't tell the difference between my family's real voices and the ones my mind might create? What if the person I trusted to tell me what was real was actually just another symptom? As we worked on the list together, the kitchen began to feel less like a battlefield and more like the heart of our home again. The afternoon light slanted through the window, casting long shadows across the table where our handwritten agreement was taking shape. Jessica had beautiful penmanship, something I'd always admired about her, and watching her careful letters form our promises felt almost ceremonial. "Number 4, Eleanor said, tapping the paper. "Weekly family dinners." "Here, if Mom's comfortable with it, or we rotate houses if that gets too overwhelming." "I like cooking for you," I said. "It makes me feel useful. But maybe we could make it easier? Nothing fancy, just time together." David cleared his throat. "What about number 5? I think we need something about what happens if Mom's condition gets worse. Not making decisions behind her back, but having a plan we all agree on." The word condition hung in the air like smoke. We still didn't know what we were dealing with, whether it was stress, grief, early dementia, or something else entirely. The uncertainty felt heavier than any diagnosis might have. "Okay," I said slowly, "but the plan includes me having a say in my own life for as long as I'm capable of having one. And you 3 don't get to decide when that point is without involving doctors, without involving me." Jessica looked up from her writing. "What if we can't tell anymore? What if you can't tell?" It was the question that had been circling my mind like a vulture. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the garden Robert and I had planted 15 years ago. The roses needed pruning, and the vegetable patch had gone to weeds since his death. I'd been meaning to tackle it, but every time I went outside with my gardening gloves, I'd find myself standing there confused about where to start. "Then I guess we'll have to trust each other to do the right thing," I said. "But David, what you did today, that wasn't trusting. That was fear making decisions." "I know." His voice was thick. "Mom, when you called me last week and asked me 3 times in 5 minutes what day it was, I hung up and immediately started Googling nursing homes. I didn't talk to Jessica about it. I didn't talk to Eleanor. I just went straight to panic mode." Eleanor frowned. "You didn't mention that call to me." "Because I was scared you'd think I was overreacting, or that you'd want to do something drastic too." "David," Eleanor said gently, "I've been worried about your mom for months, but worry doesn't mean we stop including her in decisions about her own life." Jessica set down her pen. "We need to talk about the practical stuff too. Mom, are you keeping up with your bills? Your medications? I noticed the kitchen faucet has been dripping for weeks." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I've been meaning to call a plumber. I keep forgetting to look up the number." "What if we set up some systems?" Eleanor suggested. "Not taking over, just backup systems. I could help you organize a contact list for repairs and maintenance. David could help you set up automatic bill pay if you want it. And I could come by once a week," Jessica added. "Not to check up on you, but to spend time together. Maybe we could cook together, or work in the garden." The garden. I looked out the window again, and for a moment, I could almost see Robert kneeling by the tomato plants, his hands dark with soil. Then the image flickered and faded, leaving me uncertain whether it had been a memory or something my mind had conjured. "I'd like that," I said. "But I need you all to understand something. There are going to be days when I'm fine, completely myself, and there are going to be days when I'm not. I can't promise you I'll always recognize when the bad days are happening." David stood up and joined me at the window. "Do you think Dad knew? At the end, when the pain medication made him so confused? Do you think he knew he wasn't making sense?" "Sometimes," I said. "Sometimes he'd look at me and I could see him in there, trapped and frustrated. Other times, he seemed peaceful in whatever world he was visiting." "I don't want that for you," David whispered. "I don't want it either. But David, assisted living wouldn't prevent it. Nothing would. The only thing we can control is how we treat each other while we figure this out." Eleanor joined us at the window. "Your roses are beautiful, even overgrown. Maybe this weekend we could work on them together?" "I don't know much about gardening, but I can follow directions." Robert always said the secret was knowing when to cut back and when to let things grow wild. I touched the glass, my fingertips leaving small prints. "I think I've been letting everything grow wild since he died." Jessica appeared beside us, and suddenly all 4 of us were crowded around the kitchen window, looking out at my neglected garden. It struck me how symbolic it was, all of us trying to see the same view, but probably seeing different things. "We'll figure it out, Mom," Jessica said. "All of it. The garden, the house, whatever's happening with your memory. We'll figure it out together." But even as she spoke, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, reflected in the window glass, I could see all 4 of us clearly, except my own reflection seemed to flicker, like a candle in the wind. I blinked hard and looked again, but now I couldn't tell if what I was seeing was real or another trick of my frightened mind. I forced myself to look away from the window and my unsettling reflection. My children were here. They were listening, and we were finally having the conversation we should have had months ago. That mattered more than whatever tricks my mind might be playing. "There's something else we need to discuss," I said, moving back to the table. "The intervention." The mood in the room shifted immediately. David's shoulders tensed. Eleanor looked down at her hands, and Jessica bit her lip. "I understand why you did it," I continued. "You were scared. You felt helpless. But it was the wrong approach, and it hurt me deeply." "Mom, we're sorry," Eleanor said quickly. "We thought if we all presented a united front, you'd see reason. We thought you were being stubborn about getting help." "But I wasn't being stubborn about getting help. I was being stubborn about being railroaded into a solution I hadn't chosen." I sat down and looked at each of them. There's a difference between helping someone and making decisions for them. David nodded slowly. "We were treating you like you were already incompetent." "Yes, and that's not who I am yet. I may never be that person, or it may be years away, but right now, today, I'm still capable of making informed decisions about my life." Jessica reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We were so focused on worst-case scenarios that we forgot to ask what you actually needed." "Fear makes people do desperate things," I said. "I know because I've been living in fear too. Fear of forgetting Robert completely. Fear of becoming a burden. Fear of losing myself piece by piece." The kitchen fell quiet except for the familiar sounds of the old house settling around us. The refrigerator hummed, the clock on the wall ticked steadily, and somewhere in the walls, pipes creaked as water moved through them. These were the sounds that had become my companions in the lonely months since Robert died. "What scares you most, Mom?" Eleanor asked softly. I thought about it carefully. "Disappearing. Not dying, but disappearing while I'm still alive. Becoming someone you all feel obligated to visit but don't actually want to spend time with." "That would never happen," David said firmly. "Wouldn't it? How many times in the past few months have any of you called just to talk? How many times have you visited without it being a holiday or because you felt you should check on me?" The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It was the silence of people confronting an uncomfortable truth. "We got caught up in our own lives," Jessica admitted. "After Dad died, we all assumed you needed space to grieve. Then when you seemed to be struggling, we went straight to crisis mode instead of just being present." "I'm guilty of that too," I said. "I withdrew. I stopped calling you. I stopped asking about your lives because I was afraid I wouldn't remember what you told me. It became easier to just avoid the situation entirely." Eleanor stood up and walked to the kitchen counter, then turned back to face us. "So what do we do differently going forward? How do we stay connected without being overbearing?" "We start by being honest with each other," I said. "David, tell me something real about your life right now. Not work accomplishments or surface things. Tell me something you're actually thinking about." David hesitated, then said, "I'm terrified of becoming like Dad was at the end. Not the dementia part, but the way he gave up on doing things he enjoyed because he was afraid of failing at them." "I see myself doing that already, avoiding challenges because I'm getting older." "And Eleanor?" My middle child wrapped her arms around herself. "I look in the mirror sometimes and see you at my age. It makes me panic because I feel like I haven't figured out who I'm supposed to be yet. Then I feel guilty for making your aging about me." "Jessica?" "I'm angry," Jessica said quietly. "I'm angry that Dad died and left us to figure this out. I'm angry that families don't come with instruction manuals I'm angry that we're all stumbling around trying to do the right thing and failing. I nodded. Thank you. All of you. That's what I want. I want to know what you're really thinking and feeling, even when it's messy or uncomfortable. What about you, Mom? David asked. What's something real you're thinking about? I looked around the kitchen, at the morning light streaming through windows that needed cleaning, at the coffee cups scattered on the table, at my 3 adult children who looked so much like Robert when they were concentrating. I'm thinking about how this house feels too big and too small at the same time. Too big because I rattle around in it alone. Too small because it's so full of memories that sometimes I can't breathe. Eleanor came back to the table and sat down. Do you want to move somewhere smaller? Maybe, eventually. But I want it to be my choice, made at the right time for the right reasons. Not because I'm being managed. And the memory issues? Jessica asked. I'm going to see a doctor, get a proper evaluation instead of hiding from it. But I need you all to understand that whatever we learn, I'm still going to be me for as long as possible. I need you to keep treating me like me. David leaned back in his chair. What if you do have early dementia? What if it gets worse? Then we'll deal with it when it happens. We'll adapt, but we won't fast forward to the worst-case scenario and start living there now. The conversation continued for another hour. We talked about practical things like medical appointments and home maintenance, but we also talked about feelings and fears and hopes. It was messy and sometimes painful, but it felt real in a way our family conversations hadn't in months. As my children prepared to leave, Jessica turned back from the doorway. Mom, would you like to come to dinner at my place next Sunday? Not because I'm worried about you, but because I miss spending time with you. I'd love that, I said. After they left, I stood at the kitchen window again, looking out at Robert's overgrown garden. My reflection still seemed a bit uncertain in the glass, but I decided that might just be the way old windows behave in changing light. Some things didn't need to be signs of anything more than age and wear and the natural imperfection of life. I had work to do, a doctor to call, a garden to tend, and relationships to rebuild. But for the first time in months, none of it felt impossible. It just felt like life. Complicated and imperfect, and worth living fully for as long as I was able.